Welcome back to the channel, Fight Fans. I am the MMA spokesman, and today I have a special video for you. I'm going to rank the most slappable UFC fighters in a tier list from S to D.
But I don't want no STD, no.
You know, the ones who make you want to slap them across the face every time they open their mouth or see their smug little faces. Obviously, being a gigantic pussy, I would never do it in real life, so I made this video instead. Now that we have confirmed that I am officially bitch made, let's rank some slappable fighters' faces. Kicking things off in the S tier, starting strong, we have one of the most slappable faces I've ever seen, let alone just the UFC. It's Kai Kara-France. There's just something about his grin, the way he did that weird Chris Benoit throat cut thing against Albazi, and to be honest, he's just a little gremlin cunt. I dunno, he's just annoying to look at and his face makes me furious. He's a deserved spot in the S tier for sure. Moving on to the C tier, we have another smug prick with a pretty slappable face, TJ Dillashaw. He just looks like a bully. He's also been proven to be a cheater, a snake, and a traitor by some of his former teammates and opponents. He's not someone you would want to be friends with, that's for sure. If he wouldn't completely dismantle me, I'd love to slap him with no repercussions for my actions. But since he's a former two-time bantamweight champion and one of the best fighters in the world, I'd probably end up in the hospital if I tried. So, I'll just have to settle for slapping him in this video instead. Next in the A tier, we have Caio Borralho. This dude looks like the results of what would happen if Paulo Costa fucked the schmo and impregnated him with his secret juice. I don't know if it's just me, but his face is just so goddamn slappable. I was tempted to place him in the S tier, but I settled for A because he's not as bad as Kai Kara-France. He's a decent fighter, but he's also a bit of a clown. He always tries to act cool and funny, but he ends up looking like a fucking douchebag. He also has a weird haircut and a goofy smile which drastically add to his slappability. He also has what I consider to be right up there with the worst neck tattoos of all time. Next on my list of slappable faces in the B tier is Drew Dober. Now, of course, Dober himself seems like a great down-to-earth guy with a strong work ethic and drive to succeed. He's also incredibly entertaining to watch fight. But that being said, this is a list about slappable faces, and he's definitely a fitting spot for the B tier. He just looks like a classic American jock asshole, and with a name like Drew it really fits the stereotype. His face just rubs me the wrong way. My first D tier pick is Ricky Simón. He's a young and talented bantamweight who has a lot of potential and heart. He's also a humble and friendly guy who doesn't talk trash or act cocky. But, since this is a slapping tier list, I have to admit that he does have a slappable face. Don't get me wrong, it's not as slappable as any of the prior entries, but just for having a fucking mullet in 2023, you earn a spot in the D tier. Next on the list is Chris Daukaus. He automatically receives a C tier slap for being a Fed. That's pretty much it. Fuck the po-po. Next up, we have Colby Covington, the self-proclaimed Chaos and America's champion. Colby is known for his trash talk, paying cheap models to stand next to him during promo videos, his Make America Great Again hat, and his controversial comments about other fighters and countries. He is also a very talented wrestler and decent striker, who has won 7 of his last 9 fights in the UFC. Some of you might be surprised to see Colby in the B tier, and not higher up. After all, he is one of the most hated fighters in the UFC, and many fans would love to see him get knocked out. However, as a fan of pro wrestling growing up, I have to admit that I find Colby's gimmick hilarious. He is clearly playing a character, and he does it very well. He knows how to get under people's skin, and he knows how to sell a fight. That being said, Colby still has a very slappable face. He always looks like he is smirking, even when he is getting punched in the face. He also has a very annoying voice, and he often says things that are considered disrespectful or downright offensive. So, for that reason, he earns a solid slap into the B tier. Next up in the A tier, we have Paddy Pimblett, the British sensation with mental retardation. Paddy is a former Cage Warriors champion, and he calls himself the Baddie. Now, I don't know about you, but I find Paddy very annoying. He thinks he is the next big thing in the UFC, and he calls everyone lad, even if they are older or more experienced than him. He also has a very punchable face and a very irritating voice. He is the sort of guy who would call you hand sanitizer boy like it's some form of God-tier insult and then run away when you try to confront him. Paddy is not only annoying, but also delusional. He thinks he can beat anyone in the lightweight division, but he is clearly out of his depth. He has never faced anyone near the top 30, and he would get destroyed by any of them. He is average at best, and he relies on his hype and his luck to get by. He also likes to insult other fighters, like Ilia Topuria, who he called Mushroom while having the worst mushroom haircut I've ever seen. He also said Scousers don't get knocked out after fighting a scrub in his first fight and getting chinned. All right, lad. Try that against a power puncher like my previous entry Drew Dober. So, yeah, fuck Paddy. He is going in the A tier because he deserves a good slap. Maybe that will knock some sense into him, or at least knock off that stupid haircut. Next in the D tier, we have Derek Brunson, the 8th-ranked middleweight in the UFC. He is a veteran wrestler, but he also has some flaws that make me want to slap him. He always gasses out after one round of combat, even though he has been doing this his whole life. He also has a weird shoulder posture, which makes him look awkward and uncomfortable. And because of his shoulders, his head looks comically small too. He looks like a bobblehead doll. So, he gets a D-tier slap for his lack of stamina, his strange body language, and his disproportionate head. Next on my list is the last living member of Homo sapien left, Josh Emmett. Now, if Lord of the Rings needed a new bad orc for their next movie, this guy wouldn't even need makeup and he'd still fit in unnoticed. For his orc-like features and weird delusion that at 37 he's still going to win a belt, he needs a slap back to reality into the B tier. Next in the C tier, we have Bryce Mitchell, the 12th-ranked featherweight in the UFC. Bryce is a grappler who likes to hunt, fish, and wear camo shorts. Bryce has a dumbfounded look on his face whenever he tries to say something noteworthy. His accent is something straight out of The Hills Have Eyes, and he clearly fucks his sister. He also has some flat earth views and delusions about his loss to Ilia Topuria, which he refuses to accept. So, for his stupid expression, his annoying accent, and his incestual, irrational beliefs, he gets a C-tier slap. Maybe that will make him smarter, clearer, and more realistic about his fighting ability. Next in the D tier, we have Alonzo Menifield, the 14th-ranked light heavyweight in the UFC. Alonzo is a muscular fighter with power and speed, but he also has some traits that make me want to slap him. Alonzo has a very bland personality, and he says weird shit like "oh biscuits" instead of swearing. This is, of course, straight-up slappable behavior, just something about him seems too perfect. What deep dark secrets does he have? He must be somewhat angry inside to want to fight other men for a living, and his personality to me just doesn't fit his profession. I just have a feeling that he's a fucking murderer or something. Next in the C tier, we have Tim Elliott, the 10th-ranked flyweight in the UFC. Tim is a grappler with experience and toughness, but he also has some traits that make me want to slap him. Tim has 2 first names, which is annoying enough, but he also has terrible hair. He has a mullet that, for me personally, makes you an instant candidate for a tier list ranking. Tim also likes to share his private business with the world, which is none of our concern. He recently revealed that his wife cheated on him, which, judging by his hair, I'm not really surprised, and that he was heartbroken. He also said that he was going to fight for her, and that he loved her. Well, good for him, but nobody cares. He should keep his personal life to himself, or talk to a fucking therapist. Next in the D tier, we have Movsar Evloev, the 10th-ranked featherweight in the UFC. Movsar is an undefeated fighter with wrestling and striking skills, but he also has some features that make me want to slap him. Movsar has very thin lips and a dried-out face. He looks like a prune that has been left in the sun too long. He also has a very boring personality, and he never says anything interesting or funny. He is just a bland and dull fighter. So, for his thin lips, his dried-out face, and his boring personality, he gets a D-tier slap. Maybe that will make him more lively and expressive. Moving up to the A tier, we have Aljamain Sterling, the current bantamweight champion of the UFC. Aljamain is a grappler with speed and agility, but he also has some traits that make me want to slap him. Aljamain won the belt in a controversial way, by getting disqualified by Petr Yan for an illegal knee to the face. He then acted like he was the rightful champion, and he even celebrated with the belt like he won in dominant fashion, despite the fact he was getting his ass kicked. Aljamain is also very cringe, and he says really suspect shit like I'm going to come on that ass. He also acts like he is hard done by, but the minute he spoke out about being mistreated, Dana White literally bought him a Lamborghini. He also isn't really the champion because if he fought his friend and bum buddy, Merab, he would lose to the little goblin twat. So, for his controversial win, his cringe behavior, and his whining attitude, he gets an A-tier slap. Moving on to the prestigious S tier, we have Diego Lopes, the Brazilian featherweight who made his UFC debut in May 2023. Diego is a former champion in other promotions, and he has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has a record of 21 wins and 6 losses, but without the need to say much more about him, just see why I placed him here for yourselves. Next on my list in the B tier is Sean Brady. Now, I don't know if it's his generic American jock name that makes me feel like he's an asshole, or whether I'm just biased because I find his fights boring. Like, the dude got knocked out by Belal Muhammad, what the fuck is that? Yeah, his face just really annoys me, so he's going in the B tier. Another fighter who belongs in the D tier is Steven Erceg. His face is irritating to look at. He has a weird nose, and he looks like he's brain damaged. He never smiles, he always looks miserable. He could certainly use a slap to cheer him up. That's why he's in the D tier. Back in the B tier, we have Fernando Padilla. He's a fighter who I wouldn't trust around any woman. He has a smarmy look and weird face that makes me think he's hiding something. He looks like he's always plotting something shady, so keep your girls and wives away, this man will try to steal them from you. So, for my completely made-up judgmental accusations, he's going in the B tier of my list. Another Orc of Mordor has found his way onto my list in the delusional vessel that is Anthony Smith. He is an orc who was born to fight, but not to win. His looks couldn't get much worse, so fighting at least makes him more attractive to some women. But it's not just his orcish charm that earns him a spot in the A tier, it's his blatant delusion about his skill level. The dude is washed and can't compete with any top contender nowadays, but he had the audacity to say John Jones wasn't that good, despite getting destroyed by him when they fought. That's just straight-up slappable behavior, so for that, he's a well-deserved A-tier pick. Another entry in the C tier of my slappable fighters list is Michael Chandler. He has a name that reminds me of the Lamest Friends character, which if you have seen the show, is not a good sign, because they're all fucking tragic. He also thinks he's a top contender, but he only beat Tony Ferguson, who is past his prime and unranked, and Dan Hooker, who is Dan Hooker. He's just a suck-up to Dana White, who gives him special treatment. He acts like a professional, but he fights like an amateur. He annoys me so much, and the fact he brings up his adopted child at every given opportunity to make himself seem like a great guy is just annoying. I can speak from experience being adopted myself, and I would find it weird if my adopted parents kept bringing it up like some sort of fucking flex. It's fitting that his surname begins with the letter C because that's exactly where you're going. I guess I won't be seeing you at the top. Belal Muhammad is a fighter who makes it to my A tier. He is a fighter who talks a lot about finishing guys, but doesn't back it up. He never finishes fights, except for Sean Brady, who has the striking prowess of a teenage girl, so that doesn't really count. He went 5 rounds with Gilbert Burns, who had a broken arm, and still couldn't finish him. He got poked in the eye and cried like a bitch, and he keeps calling for title shots, despite getting dismantled by Leon Edwards before the eye poke. He thinks he's really cool, but even in Abu Dhabi, the fans didn't care about him at the press conference. He annoys me so much, he's in the A tier, and yes I know, he should be higher, But there is one man, even more annoying than Belal. And we will discover who, very shortly. Dominick Cruz is another fighter who joins my B tier. He is a fighter who always acts like he's better than you. I don't know what it is, but his grin pisses me off and his nasally voice just makes me cringe. Yes, he's a good analyst and he was a great fighter, but he's washed and needs to stop thinking he's still a top-level fighter. He lost to Henry Cejudo in 2020, barely beat Casey Kinney in 2021, and just got head-kicked by another overrated contender in Marlon Vera. He's not a threat to anyone in the bantamweight division anymore. Just fucking retire already. Bryan Battle is another fighter who joins the B tier. He is a fighter who reminds me of Scotty P from the movie We're the Millers, who has the no regrets tattoo spelled wrong. He even has the same you know what I'm saying catchphrase, and he's just annoying. He also has the nickname Pooh Bear, so make of that what you will. Tresean Gore is the next entry on my list of slappable fighters. He is a fighter who has very close-set eyes, which makes him look like a created fighter on UFC 4 with the eye separation slider set to 0. He emerged from the Ultimate Fighter 29 as the middleweight winner, beating my previous entry Bryan Battle by TKO in the finale. He's not as annoying as Bryan Battle, but his face is just as odd, so I'm ranking him just below his Ultimate Fighter counterpart. Remaining in the C tier, it's Joaquin Buckley. He is a fighter who got one highlight reel knockout at middleweight, but then got knocked out a bunch of times himself. He won one fight at welterweight, and now he's claiming no welterweight can knock him out. The dude is just cringe to listen to, and something about his face just makes me want to slap him. That being said, I think Bryan Battle is way more slappable, so he can take a seat next to my boy Tresean in the C tier. The last fighter making an appearance in the B tier is the Sugar Show, Sean O'Malley. He is a fighter who has a rainbow hairstyle that looks like he's trying to be a SoundCloud rapper from 5 years ago. He thinks he's the next Conor McGregor, but he doesn't have the same charisma or wit when it comes to trash talking. He's a skilled fighter, but he's not a big draw yet. He annoys me with his clothing choice, but he does that on purpose, a lot like Colby Covington, unlike the guys in the A and S tier who are just naturally slappable and annoying as fuck. Back to the C tier of my most slappable fighter list is Chito Vera. Yes, I know, I'm a hater, whatever, he really isn't that good. His run consisted of old past their prime fighters, and his lucky kick to Sean O'Malley's peroneal nerve is the only reason he even got any shine to begin with. Yes, he was working the calves of O'Malley so you can justify the win by saying he meant to do it. But really, if he had meant to do it, then he would just do that exact kick in every fight because surely it's an easy win. To me, he's just overrated, has a huge ego and attitude problem, and just thinks he's better than he is. Now of course the dude is tough as shit and I'd never actually slap the man, but for the sake of this video he's going in the C tier. Brian Ortega is the final fighter who makes it into the D tier. He is a fighter who has a dopey demeanor that makes me want to slap him before I ultimately starts losing limbs piece by piece when he retaliates. It's like he's talking in slow motion and it takes him forever to actually say anything, and when he eventually makes whatever point it is, because you're lost by the end, it's something really anticlimactic. He also takes an L for splitting up with Tracy Cortez. And finally in the S tier is the most slappable fighter in the UFC, Merab Dvalishvili. He is a fighter who annoys me with everything he does. He has a boring fight style, which consists of shooting for takedowns and failing at holding his opponents down. He has no finishing ability at all and has this weird relationship with Aljamain Sterling, where they refuse to fight each other despite Merab being the #1 contender and Sterling being the champion. His face is another reason to dislike the guy. He just looks like a creepy uncle who only visits once a year at Christmas to give you an advent calendar that was brought from Hollandis just moments before arriving. His face has aged like milk and he's just an annoyance to the bantamweight division and the UFC fanbase. For just being a cunt and pissing off the entire MMA world when he announced Jose Aldo's retirement before Aldo did, he officially earns the highest ranking of slappable fighter in this list. I appreciate your interest in my list of the most slappable UFC fighters. If you skipped to the end, then thanks for checking out how it all concluded. Please note that this list is not meant to be taken seriously, as I do not have any intention of actually slapping any of the fighters in the list. This list is merely an experiment to gauge the reaction and performance of a video of this nature. I doubt I will make another one, so enjoy it while you can. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, The MMA Spokesman, for more dope MMA content.